There comes a moment in every person's life when they must decide who they are trying to surpass. For most people, that answer is tragically external. They compare themselves to the neighbor, the colleague, the influencer, or the illusion of someone living a life free from struggle. But comparison is a deceptive metric. It distracts you from the only opponent who truly matters, the person you were yesterday. That version of you, your habits, your fears, your weaknesses, your unrealized potential, is the only competition that can lead to genuine transformation. You see, when you measure yourself against others, you surrender your autonomy. Their achievements control your emotions. Their success defines your sense of worth. But when you turn your gaze inward and measure yourself against your own past, something remarkable happens. Responsibility replaces envy. Growth replaces resentment. You begin to see that every small improvement, a little more discipline, a little less chaos, a bit more clarity, creates a foundation for a life that is stable, meaningful, and worthwhile. Improvement is not an accident, it is an ethical obligation. You carry a moral responsibility to refine yourself each day, even if only by an inch. Why? Because the world suffers when people refuse to grow. Families fall apart, dreams dissolve, futures shrink not because people are incapable, but because they never confront the past version of themselves with courage. If you don't challenge your yesterday self, that older, weaker version of you will eventually dominate your life and dictate your destiny. Progress is built through small victories, not grand declarations. The battle is fought in the quiet moments, waking up when you said you would, finishing the work you planned, resisting the easy path that leads nowhere. These seemingly minor successes accumulate, order grows from them, confidence grows from them, identity grows from them. And before you realize it, you have stepped into a new version of yourself, someone your past self could never have imagined. But this confrontation with yesterday isn't about self-hatred. It requires honesty without cruelty. You must be willing to observe your flaws without collapsing under their weight. You must acknowledge your weaknesses not to shame yourself, but to refine yourself. When you accept that yesterday's failures were lessons rather than verdicts, you begin to build a future that is stronger than your past. So remind yourself every day, the real competition is not outside you. It is behind you. Become someone that your yesterday self would look at with admiration. Outgrow your excuses. Outgrow your old fears. Outgrow the version of yourself that settled for less than you were capable of. If you win this internal battle even slightly, you move toward a life of purpose, dignity, and meaning. And if you do that consistently, day after day, the transformation is inevitable. Growth becomes natural. Responsibility becomes strength. And your life becomes a testimony to the truth that the only competition worth engaging in is the one that elevates you, not the one that destroys you. Because the only competition, the only real competition, is your yesterday self. Comparison is one of the most subtle yet destructive forces that shape human behavior. When you compare yourself to others, you are essentially borrowing someone else's story and using it as a ruler to measure your own worth. But their story is not your story. Their circumstances, their struggles, their opportunities, and their inner battles are entirely different from yours. Still, comparison convinces you that you are inadequate simply because someone else seems to be ahead. This illusion pulls you away from your own path and blinds you to the progress you are already making. Instead of focusing on your next step, you become distracted by someone else's destination. The real tragedy of comparison is not that it lowers your self-esteem, it's that it hijacks your direction. When you allow others to become the standard, you lose sight of who you are supposed to become. Your decisions stop reflecting your values and start reflecting your insecurities. Your goals become reactive rather than intentional. Instead of asking, "What kind of life am I meant to build?" you ask, "How do I catch up to them?" This shift is subtle but profoundly dangerous because it replaces your internal compass, your sense of purpose, your identity, your moral center, with an unstable external benchmark that constantly changes. Comparison also generates emotional chaos. It breeds resentment, jealousy, anxiety, and self-doubt, emotions that cloud your clarity and drain your energy. Even if you achieve something meaningful, comparison steals the joy from your accomplishments. You could climb a mountain that once felt impossible, but the moment you see someone on a taller peak, your victory suddenly feels insignificant. This is the curse of comparison. It turns progress into disappointment and gratitude into dissatisfaction. It trains your mind to believe that nothing you do is enough because someone else always seems to be doing more. Moreover, comparison interferes with your ability to pursue authentic growth. Real growth comes from self-awareness, understanding your strengths, acknowledging your weaknesses, and taking responsibility for your trajectory. But when you compare yourself to others, your focus shifts from inner evaluation to external judgment. You begin copying paths that were never meant for you. You chase goals that don't align with your nature. You lose connection with your own potential because you are too busy mirroring someone else's. This leads to a life that looks successful from the outside, but feels empty on the inside, because it was built on imitation rather than purpose. Ultimately, comparison corrupts your internal compass because it replaces self-mastery with self-doubt. It convinces you that your value is determined by where you stand relative to someone else, rather than where you stand compared to your past self. Your internal compass exists to guide you toward growth, integrity, and meaning, but comparison disrupts its calibration. To reclaim your direction, you must shift your focus inward. Measure your progress against who you were yesterday, not who someone else is today. Only then does your compass realign, your path stabilizes, and your life begins moving toward its true potential, authentic, purposeful, and entirely your own. Self-improvement is not just a personal ambition. It is a moral duty you owe to yourself and to the people whose lives intersect with yours. Every individual influences the world around them through their actions, their discipline, their emotional stability, and their choices. When a person chooses to remain stagnant, they don't just halt their own growth. They unintentionally add chaos, confusion, and disorder to their environment. Improvement is not merely about becoming stronger or more skilled. It is about reducing the burden you place on others and increasing the value you bring to your relationships, your community, and your future. In this sense, growth becomes an ethical requirement rather than a hobby. At its core, self-improvement acknowledges a fundamental truth. You have the capacity to become better than you currently are. To ignore that potential is to reject a part of your own humanity. When you refuse to grow, you allow your weaknesses to become someone else's problem. Your lack of discipline becomes someone else's responsibility. Your emotional instability becomes someone else's stress, and your unfulfilled potential becomes lost opportunity for both you and the world. Improvement, therefore, is a responsibility because your behavior has real consequences. The world is shaped by people who either strive to rise above their limitations or sink into them, dragging others down along the way. Self-improvement is moral because it aligns you with order rather than chaos. Growth requires you to confront your flaws honestly, accept uncomfortable truths, and take responsibility for your failures. This act of self-confrontation is difficult, which is precisely why it transforms you. You must develop discipline, clarity, resilience, and humility, qualities that not only improve your life, but elevate the lives of those around you. A disciplined person strengthens their family. A responsible person stabilizes their environment. A courageous person becomes a source of inspiration for others. Each step toward improvement contributes to a ripple effect of order and meaning. Furthermore, self-improvement is a duty because you are not the only one affected by your potential. Every gift you possess, your intelligence, your empathy, your creativity, your strength, is meant to be cultivated for the benefit of others. The world becomes better when people develop their abilities and use them wisely, but when a person refuses to improve, they withhold what they could contribute. They limit the growth of the people who depend on them. They shrink their influence, reduce their possibilities, and weaken their capacity to make a positive impact. In this sense, improving yourself is not self-centered, it is an act of service. Ultimately, the moral weight of self-improvement lies in the understanding that becoming better is not optional if you want to live a meaningful life. You owe it to your past self who survived everything up to this point. You owe it to your future self who depends on the choices you make today. And you owe it to the world, which desperately needs individuals who take responsibility for their lives instead of surrendering to excuses. When you choose growth, you align yourself with purpose, integrity, and dignity. You become someone capable of carrying more, giving more, and being more. That is why self-improvement is, and always will be, a profound moral responsibility. Order is not something that suddenly appears in a person's life. It doesn't arrive in a dramatic moment or through a single life-changing decision. Instead, it emerges quietly, built brick by brick through the small victories you accumulate each day. These victories often look insignificant: waking up on time, completing a task you promised yourself, resisting a destructive habit, or taking a step toward a meaningful goal. Yet each small act becomes a thread that gradually weaves structure into your life. Over time, they transform chaos into clarity and uncertainty into direction. What appears small on the surface becomes foundational in shaping who you are becoming. Daily victories matter because they reinforce your ability to trust yourself. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you strengthen your internal authority. You prove that your intentions are not empty words, but commitments that hold weight. This builds discipline, and discipline is the root of order. Without discipline, life collapses into disorder, time slips away, opportunities are wasted, and your potential remains dormant. But with discipline, even small actions accumulate into powerful momentum. A person who wins these tiny battles becomes someone capable of facing larger challenges with confidence and purpose. These daily victories also shape your psychological landscape. When you consistently achieve small tasks, your mind gradually shifts from a state of helplessness to a state of capability. You begin to recognize that improvement is not impossible. It is simply incremental. This shift is vital because the human mind often feels overwhelmed by the magnitude of long-term goals. But when you reduce the struggle into manageable steps, small wins, you train your mind to associate effort with progress rather than frustration. The emotional stability and confidence that emerge from this process create a foundation for deeper, more meaningful transformation. Additionally, small victories create order because they interrupt cycles of chaos. Chaos does not dominate your life all at once. It grows slowly from neglected responsibilities, ignored problems, and repeated small failures. When you allow a day to slip by without purpose, it becomes easier to repeat the pattern until disorder becomes normal. But when you win even a minor battle, cleaning your space, completing your work, speaking truthfully, or controlling an impulse, you weaken the influence of chaos. These victories are like anchors. They ground you, stabilize you, and prevent your life from drifting into confusion and regret. Ultimately, the power of small, daily victories lies in their ability to transform your identity. Every victory, no matter how minor, shifts your self-perception. You stop seeing yourself as someone who fails to follow through and start seeing yourself as someone capable of growth. This internal shift is profound because identity dictates behavior. When you believe you are capable, you act accordingly. Order grows, not because you force it into your life, but because you become the kind of person who naturally sustains it. And once order begins to take shape, your life moves forward with clarity, strength, and purpose, built on the foundation of victories so small that most people fail to recognize their power. Your past self is the only fair and meaningful benchmark for measuring growth because no one else shares your history, your struggles, your wounds, or your unique journey. Every person lives a life shaped by distinct circumstances, different opportunities, environments, challenges, and responsibilities. When you compare yourself to someone else, the comparison is inherently flawed because you're measuring two different stories with the same ruler. But when you compare yourself to who you were yesterday, last month, or last year, the comparison becomes honest. It reflects whether you've moved forward, stayed stagnant, or fallen behind in your own personal evolution. This self-referential measurement is the only one that respects your individuality. Using your past self as the benchmark protects your mental clarity. When you evaluate your growth based on your own history, you avoid the emotional traps of envy, insecurity, and discouragement. Instead of feeling inadequate because someone else is ahead, you focus on genuine progress rooted in your own reality. This shifts your mindset from external judgment to internal accountability. You start focusing on improving your habits, refining your character, and strengthening your weaknesses, not because you're trying to outperform others, but because you're trying to elevate your own life. This internal focus brings stability and direction that comparison cannot provide. Your past self also serves as the most accurate benchmark because it shows you what is actually possible for you. No one knows your limitations and potential better than you. When you look back, you can see patterns, where you succeeded, where you procrastinated, where fear held you back, and where discipline lifted you forward. These reflections become your data. They reveal what kind of effort leads to progress and what kind of behavior leads to decline. This is powerful information. It allows you to build a personalized roadmap for growth, one based not on someone else's trajectory but on your own evolving capabilities. Furthermore, measuring yourself against your past prevents the illusion of overnight change. Real growth happens gradually, through consistent effort and small improvements. When you look to others for comparison, you might expect results to come quickly because you only see the final outcome, not the years of effort behind it. But when you compare yourself to your earlier self, the progress becomes clear. Maybe your discipline has improved, maybe your mindset has shifted, maybe your emotional stability is stronger. These incremental changes might seem small dated, but over time they accumulate into transformation. This recognition fuels motivation and helps you stay committed to the path. Ultimately, your past self is the only accurate benchmark because it reminds you of the true purpose of growth, becoming a better version of who you were, not a replica of someone else. Growth is not about reaching someone else's level. It is about expanding your own potential. When you focus on your own evolution, you live a life aligned with authenticity and self-respect. You honor your journey, appreciate your progress, and maintain responsibility over your future. And in that process, you discover a profound truth. The real competition has never been with others, it has always been with the person you were yesterday. Progress begins the moment you develop the courage to look inward and acknowledge your flaws honestly. But this confrontation is delicate because it requires a balance that most people struggle to maintain. If you avoid your flaws, you stay trapped in the same cycles of failure, frustration, and stagnation. But if you confront your flaws with hatred, shame, or self-attack, you paralyze yourself emotionally and destroy your capacity to grow. True progress demands that you see your weaknesses clearly without collapsing under them. This is an act of maturity, the ability to hold two truths at once. I am imperfect, and I can become better. Many people fear examining their flaws because they believe doing so will expose them as failures. They imagine that acknowledging weakness means admitting defeat. But the opposite is true. Avoidance is defeat. Honesty is strength. When you confront your flaws with compassion rather than contempt, you allow yourself the space to change. You can identify the patterns that sabotage your progress, whether it's procrastination, fear, emotional impulsivity, lack of discipline, or avoidance of responsibility, and treat them as problems to be solved, not traits that define your worth. This mindset turns self-reflection into a tool for empowerment rather than self-punishment. Confronting your flaws without hatred also preserves your psychological resilience. Self-hatred drains energy, shatters confidence, and reinforces the belief that you are unworthy of improvement. It creates a destructive cycle where flaws are magnified, strengths are ignored, and effort feels pointless. But when you approach your mistakes with patience and responsibility, your mind remains stable enough to take the next step forward. You begin to understand that flaws are part of being human, not evidence of personal failure. They are signals, indicators of where attention, discipline, and growth are required. This perspective keeps your identity intact while allowing your behavior to evolve. Another reason progress requires flaw confrontation without self-hatred is that growth depends on feedback, and you cannot accept feedback if you see every flaw as an attack on your identity. If your ego collapses every time you recognize imperfection, you will avoid the very insights that could transform you. But if you cultivate humility, a willingness to admit you are not yet who you could be, you make room for improvement. Humility allows you to analyze your shortcomings rationally, make corrections without shame, and adjust your behavior with clarity. This process doesn't weaken you. It strengthens you by aligning your actions with your potential rather than your fears. Ultimately, progress demands that you treat yourself as someone who is worth improving. This means confronting your flaws with honesty, responsibility, and compassion, not contempt. When you understand your weaknesses without letting them define your identity, you position yourself for continuous evolution. You become capable of growth because you no longer hide from the truth or attack yourself for it. Instead, you learn from it. And this is the foundation of genuine progress, a commitment to refining yourself day by day, guided not by self-hatred but by the belief that you can become someone stronger, wiser, and more capable than you were yesterday.